Yeah, you can go ahead, Akshay.
Okay. Participants, if I'm audible, can you please raise your hands just to ascertain that you can hear all of us and you can see all of us?
Yeah, perfect, Akshay.
Okay, thank you so much, participants. So a very good evening and welcome you all to another webinar as part of the CISC webinar series. And also, it's been a really long-standing and good collaboration with Scots Grad. We've been able to reach a fairly large number of students and the academic community. And I want to welcome people on behalf of Holy Cross College, Tiruchi, who are under the co-incubation with CIIC. Moving into the session, so today we have our speaker who has a very illustrious academic background and a very large experience in the field of psychology, which at this point is the most important one because we've been all at our home for 4 straight months and understanding people and people interaction has become one of the major parts. So Professor Nick is with us today and it's my pleasure to introduce Professor Nick. Mr. Nick Hopkins is a professor of psychology at University of Dundee. He holds a BA Honours degree in experimental psychology from Oxford University and MPhil in criminology from Cambridge University and a PhD in social psychology from Exeter University. He has been an academic at the University of Dundee since 1989. During this time, he has lectured, conducted research, and held various administrative roles, including the head of psychology department. He served on several journals' editorial boards and was the joint editor-in-chief of the British Journal of Psychology, Social Psychology between the year 2014 to 16. Over to Professor Nick for the session. Very happy to welcome you.
Great. Well, thank you very much. Thank you. It's a great pleasure to join you. And what I'll try to do now is to share my screen. Hopefully this will work. Let's see if it does work. So hopefully you can see a screen that says psychology and its relevance to social problems. That looks okay. I'm getting the thumbs up from one of my viewers, and Nikita, you're smiling, so I'm guessing that works. Fantastic. Yep. Well, thank you very much. It's a wonderful opportunity to be able to speak to you. I'm speaking to you from my house, which is just outside Dundee in a small village. And for me, it's just 2 o'clock in the afternoon. I'm guessing for you, it is rather later in the early evening. So I'm going to talk about psychology and its relevance to social problems. And I'll say a little bit, if I can, about myself. You've already heard a little bit about me. There's a photograph of me on the left there with my wife. I studied psychology to begin with. Then I did criminology, which I enjoyed. That was a mixture of psychology, psychiatry, law, sociology, and philosophy. So I did a master's course in that. And then I did a PhD in social psychology, looking at social behavior, in particular, how our behavior is shaped by groups that we are members of. And there's a picture there of me as a much younger man with my son. And you can see how old that is because my son is now 37 and has 3 children of his own. But that was when I was doing my PhD way back in Exeter. So as a social psychologist, I'm interested in how our behavior is shaped by our membership of various groups. Now, some of you will be psychologists, others of you will be doing other disciplines, but perhaps with an interest in psychology. And it's important to be clear, what is the image of psychology and what is the reality? So the image for many people, certainly who come to study as undergraduates in the UK, is that psychology is about Freud. It's about psychoanalysis. It's about the interpretation of somebody's dreams. It's about trying to find out that person's personality. It's about investigating the hidden drives that shape their behavior. Actually, psychology is much, much more interesting than that. It is much more diverse, for example. So psychology includes the study of the biological basis for our behavior. Which areas of the brain are involved in which activity? If you have a car crash and you have damage to a particular area of your head, that may have consequences that are different than if you had damage to another area of your head. So what are the areas of the brain that are involved in particular activities? How may they be investigated? What are the consequences of damage to particular areas? Cognitive psychology, how are we able to think? How are we able to solve problems? How are we able to navigate around the world that we're living in? How are we able to represent the world and act within it? Developmental psychology, how do we develop these skills? These are amazing skills to have. How do we develop? What are the stages we go through? And as we get older, what are the stages through which some of those abilities and skills decline? We're able to use language, we're able to communicate. We take this for granted, that we can speak, that we can read, but actually if you think about it, these are amazing accomplishments. Reading involves looking at squiggles on a piece of paper or on a screen, but somehow we're able to get meaning, to have some understanding of what the purpose of the communication is, of what was in the other person's mind. We also need to look at how people vary and differ from each other. They differ in terms of their personality, they differ in terms of their skills, in terms of their intelligence, in terms of their spatial abilities. We need to understand those differences. How do they arise and how are they consequential? We also need to look at another aspect of how people differ, and that is in their mental health. Now, there'll be all sorts of factors that impact upon somebody's mental health. Some of it will be due to areas of the brain malfunctioning in some way. So if you drink a lot of alcohol over a number of years, then there will be damage to particular areas of the brain that will have long-term consequences. For example, Korsakoff psychosis, where memory is going to be deeply affected by that alcohol consumption. Other areas of our mental health would be based much more on our interactions with others, how loneliness contributes to a sense of anxiety and depression. And then the social psychology, and I'm a social psychologist, as I've said. I'm interested in how our behaviour is shaped by our membership of various groups. So hopefully already you have a sense that psychology is exciting, it's broad, and it is much more interesting than the popular image. The reality really is very, very interesting. In fact, the only similarity you'd see between psychology as we practice it in university settings in the UK and the image of Freud is that people like me, at a certain age, their beard goes white. So that is really the only similarity between psychology as we teach it here in the UK and the popular image of Freud. So psychology is an empirical discipline, and this is important. We're trying to develop theories, we're trying to have an understanding of human behaviour, but it has to be based upon a robust interrogation of empirical data. So we need to do research, and we try to develop our theories on the basis of that. So our work, we try to describe behaviour. We need to have a clear picture of what's going on. We try to explain that behaviour. What are the processes that lead to that behaviour? And then having those theories, we try to be able to predict behaviour. A good test of a theory is, can you predict? Can you make certain predictions and then investigate them? And also, of course, we want to use our theories to help influence behaviour. And you don't have to look any further than the current COVID crisis to see the relevance of psychology. A lot of what governments are trying to do is change people's behaviour, to encourage social distancing, to get them to wear a mask, to get them to wash their hands for 20 seconds frequently. These things are all behavioural interventions that are crucial in the fight against this pandemic, and all of those interventions require an understanding of behaviour, the determinants of behaviour. How can you influence people's behaviour? We do our research in various settings. Some of my colleagues go to the laboratory and they will put this cap on your head and they will be able to measure the conductivity from those various sensors, and that'll give some indication of the activity in particular areas of the brain as you are solving a particular task or engaging in a particular activity. Some of my other colleagues will be trying to look at your eye movements. So we have a lot of equipment that means we can look at where you look. And if you're doing research on reading, for example, of how people learn to read and the errors they make when reading, it's a fantastic device. You can look and see where people are actually looking and when they're not looking. I'm a social psychologist and I like, if possible, to get outside the laboratory. I like to be able to go into the field and do my research in community settings, looking at community issues. And the picture I've just put up there is of a tent that we used as our research headquarters when I was involved in a project in India with the University of Allahabad in Uttar Pradesh, where we were looking at pilgrimage to the Magh Mela just outside Allahabad. And I'll talk about that in a minute later on. So the research I want to talk about today is research I've been doing over a number of years, and a lot of it I've been doing with students who've been studying with me. And my interest really is in that sense of belonging. And there's a little picture of my passport that says that I am a citizen of the UK. So I belong to the UK, and by virtue of belonging, I get a number of rights. I get the right to come and live here. I get the right to work here. I get the right to vote. So I get a certain number of rights, benefits by being a member of the group. But I'm interested in being members of all sorts of different groups. It may be a community, a neighborhood, it may be a religious grouping, it may be a business, it may be an organization that I'm working in. So I'm a member of various groups, and I may see myself as being a member of those groups, but do other people really see me as being a member of that community? I may have that passport, which is a formal declaration that I belong, but do people in their everyday routine think of me as being really a member of the group? So these are issues that I'm interested in. Do you feel included? And if you don't, how does that have consequences? Do you feel that you can actually participate, that you are seen as a legitimate member of the group, able to make criticisms about the group? Do you have a voice, in other words? Will you be listened to? Will you be heard? Or will you be ignored? How are you going to be treated? Being a member of a group gives you all sorts of benefits. I've mentioned being able to vote, being able to work, but there's other informal benefits. People will help you. People will act with solidarity towards you. They'll support you. Well, do you get that? And how does all of this contribute to your sense of well-being? Our sense of well-being is very often bound up with how we feel we are treated within a community. Are we accepted? Are we valued? Do we get the benefits of the community? So this research, I'm going to talk about various groups, and it's of relevance for community psychology. If you're interested as an NGO in trying to work with the community, you need to think about this. But also if you're a business person, if you're working in the corporate sector, you need to be a good organizational psychology. And a lot of organizational psychology is about looking at people's sense of belonging. Do they feel valued? Do they feel really a member of this group? And if not, then you can bet that people will feel alienated, that they will be less productive, they will be less engaged. So this issue of belonging, I think, is crucial for all areas that you can think of. And I'm going to talk about research that I've done with students mainly here in Dundee, and I'm going to talk a little bit about different methods that we use. So sometimes to get to people's experiences, we may do interviews. If we're interested in the processes, we may do experiments and we may do surveys. And I'll give you some examples of all of these. And I mention this because this is the part of psychology that I really enjoy. Working with students, working with PhD students, undergraduate students, master's students, trying to do pieces of research. And through that, the student learns a lot about the theory and a lot about research practice. So the very first example I'll give you, it's just one interview quote. This was a project I was doing with people who were involved in various forms of community activism. In this case, campaigning against the war in Iraq. Britain was involved in a war in Iraq for many, many years, the Gulf War. And there was a lot of opposition to it, a lot of protests. In London, there was a march of more than 1 million people against this war. And I did interviews with people asking about their participation and how they felt. And here is a young woman, a Muslim woman, a student, Scottish, and she describes why she was opposed to the war. And she spoke about this in relation to a friend. She was explaining to the friend why she was against the war. And the friend said this, "Oh, because you're a Muslim." And the interviewee said, "No, because I just don't agree with the policies. They're our soldiers. I don't see them as the British soldiers as if it's something apart from me. You know, I don't see that. I'm part and parcel of this society. They're out there protecting British interests, which are my interests because I'm a citizen. So all of these issues affect me." Now that's a short quote, but actually, if you read it and think about it, I think that you'll all see there's quite a lot of meaning here. There's a sense here that this woman sees herself as a British citizen, feels that it's her duty, her responsibility as a good citizen to speak out about issues when she feels that the country's doing the wrong thing. She's doing that. However, other people don't think of her and hear her as being a British citizen. They think of her and hear her as being a Muslim and assume that she's opposed to the war because she is a Muslim. not because she's a British citizen and she has the right to criticize British policies. So it's a very simple example, but I think it's quite illustrative that you may think of yourself and you may act in terms of a particular group membership. You may see yourself as British and want to complain about Britishness and the way in which it is being performed with the military. However, somebody else will think of you in different terms. You're not being recognized fully as a British citizen. People suspect that your opinions derive from the fact of your religion. So it's a bit of a shock, a bit of a surprise to find that people don't think of you in the way that you think of yourself. So now I want to describe a couple of experiments. That was an interview study, just to give you an illustration. So here are a couple of experiments, studies that I've done with students working with me. And this first one was to essentially look at, when do people accept criticism? When do people listen to somebody who's being critical of the group? So it was a student project, and in it, Scottish-born participants would read about a person. So you would read a little interview provided by this person. We made it up, of course. That's one of the other fun things about being a psychologist. You're often involved in trying to deceive people. So we created a little interview. The person in the interview said that they felt Scottish. And then what we did was we manipulated their name. So their name was either Chris Muir or Jan Shen. And why did we do this? The logic was simple. We wanted to choose names that would be seen as typically Scottish or not typically Scottish. Chris Muir is seen as a very typical Scottish name. Jan Shen isn't seen as a Scottish name, really. It's seen very much as a South Asian or Southeast Asian name. So we have exactly the same interview, and the person is either described as being Chris Muir or Jan Shen. And that person makes criticisms about Scotland. We also manipulate the criteria for being Scottish. So what do you have to be Scottish? Do you have to have a Scottish grandmother? Do you have to have a surname like MacDonald or Mackenzie or MacLeish or MacDougall? Do you need to have a lineage, a family history that goes back generations? Or can you be Scottish just by living here? I've been living in Scotland for 30 years, more than 30 years. Can I say that I feel Scottish? I do. Will other people think of me as being a fellow Scot or not? So this is a study where we essentially gave people a little interview to read. And in the interview, the person makes criticisms of Scotland. That person is either named Jan Shen or Chris Muir. And we either manipulate your understanding of what you have to be Scottish to either imply you need to have an ethnic heritage or to have a civic conception of Scottishness, one which it doesn't matter where you're from, it doesn't matter where you were born. If you feel Scottish, then that's enough. And we had people making criticisms about Scotland for a very simple reason. We know from research that people find it much harder to take criticism of their group when it comes from somebody they see as not belonging to that group. So somebody who makes a criticism of your group would be much more likely to have their criticisms heard if they're seen as a fellow in-group member, part of the community, than if they're seen as an outsider. So we can make some very, very basic, simple predictions. Chris Muir is lucky. Chris Muir will always be listened to. He'll always be heard as being Scottish, and his criticisms will always get a degree of respect, a degree of value. They'll always be heard and given some value. Jan Shen, however, making exactly the same criticisms, exactly the same observations about how Scotland has problems and needs to improve, will be heard differently. Whether Jan Shen is listened to or not will depend crucially upon people's understandings of what you have to be Scottish. Under a civic conception of Scottishness, then Jan Shen is part of the community. So all you need to do is to feel part of the community to be accepted. However, under an ethnic conception, it's not about how Jan Shen feels, it's about who his mother and father were and who their mothers and fathers were. In other words, it's to do with some ethnic lineage. So we predicted a very straightforward set of outcomes that Jan Shen would find under an ethnic conception of Scottishness, his criticisms being rejected, but under a civic conception, his criticisms being accepted. And it was enormous fun to do this study, particularly because the results came out exactly as we'd hoped for. If you look at the two red bars, that refers to Chris Muir. And although it may look as if those two red bars are slightly different from each other in their height, they're not, they're exactly the same. Now look at the blue bars. Jan Shen, under an ethnic conception of Scottishness, is not listened to very much at all. Under a civic conception, there you can see an increase in the degree to which his opinions are being listened to and accepted. A higher score means greater acceptance of criticism. So this is a very, very simple study. As I said, I did it with a student. It was enormous fun, and it shows this key take-home message. Our understanding of who belongs will be crucial for how that person is treated. In this case, whether their criticisms will be heard. Let's now take a rather different scenario. And again, this is a student project that I did with different students. And this research took place in a public setting. And in fact, it took part in one of the university halls. It's a large reception area in the main administration building. And what would happen here is you, as a participant, will be walking through that building and you'd be stopped by somebody who's a researcher. And this researcher would ask you to complete a short questionnaire. And hopefully you'd say, of course, no problem. It only takes a few minutes. And you'd complete this little questionnaire. This questionnaire was designed to manipulate people's understandings of what you had to have to be Scottish, to create either a civic conception, such that anybody who feels they belong counts as belonging, versus an ethnic conception where you have to have certain things. It has to be in your blood. And once you've completed the questionnaire, the experimenter would say, thank you very much, and would let you go. Now, as you began to move away, somebody else would come around the corner. This is why this was such fun. This student, her name is Carmen Sheck, she did her dissertation with me, would come around the corner. She's wearing a Scottish rugby shirt, which signals that she's proud of Scotland, that she feels an affinity with Scotland. She's carrying a box that is marked fragile, and in her right hand, you can see she's carrying a small box of pens, 20 pens in all. So you have just finished that questionnaire with the first experimenter, and now somebody comes round the corner, walks in front of you, and as they walk in front of you, they pretend to trip. They drop the box on the floor and they drop all of those pens on the floor. They then move to one side, taking that fragile brown box with them, carefully position it. That creates a little bit of time. And we then are interested to see, do you now pick up some pens? Do you actually go and help her or not? And we made a very, very clear and simple prediction. We predicted that those of you that had a civic conception of Scottishness, which is more inclusive, would see her as being Scottish and would think, oh, I should go and help her. You'd go and pick up more pens than those who are working with an ethnic conception of Scottishness, who wouldn't see her as a fellow Scot, would see her somehow as an alien other. So we predicted that people would be more helpful with a civic conception of Scottishness than with an ethnic conception of Scottishness. The woman, as you can see, is exactly the same in both of those conditions. She has Chinese heritage. She's wearing the same shirt. The crucial thing is in what is in your head in terms of your mental representation of what you have to be Scottish. We predicted and found that there was more help offered in the civic condition than in the ethnic condition. So again, a simple little study, enormous fun to do. We were able to write it up and get it published, which is even better. Looking at that sense of belonging. You feel you belong. Do other people look at you in the same way? And if they don't, then you're unlikely to receive the help that you think you should get. Now, a different study. This is research that I did with colleagues in the University of Allahabad in Uttar Pradesh, looking at the Magh Mela. This enormous Hindu pilgrimage event happens every year in January. For a full month, people come to live on the banks of the Ganga. A large number of people are there. So of course, when there's a large number of people, you could think of them as just a collection of individuals, or you could have a sense of community, that there is something here that unites us, that binds us together. You could have some sense of a group identity where you belong to that community. It's a transient community. It comes together just for a month, but you can still feel part of a group, some sense of belonging. So this is what we were interested in. We wanted to see, to what degree do pilgrims develop a sense of community identity? And if they do, does that contribute to a sense of well-being? Do they have a sense of connection with others? Does that give them a sense of solidarity with others? Do they anticipate that they would get help if they need it? So this is what we're interested in. And we had a research project that allowed us to have a research station in the Magh Mela. And there's a picture there of one of the master's students that we used in the project, we employed in the project as part of our team administering a questionnaire. The design for our research, it was multi-method. The key part I'm going to talk about now is a longitudinal survey. So essentially we were able to get people who went to this festival before they went in December and then after they went in March. And we were able to get people who did not go to the festival, but who were similar in every other respect, again, before December and after the event in March. So what we have here is a longitudinal study. We're looking at the same people at different points in time. And we also have a target group, the Kalpvasi. These are people who are going to do this 1 month on the banks of the Ganga. And we have a control group of non-participants. And what we did in December and in March was we gave them a questionnaire when they were in their villages, asking them to report their well-being. So we get measures of their well-being, and that allows us to see how does their well-being in March compare to their well-being in the previous December. Is there any change? In particular, is there change amongst the Kalpvasi, those who went on this pilgrimage? And then we also gathered data from the Kalpvasi, the pilgrims, when they were in the event, when they were in the middle of the Magh Mela. Imagine this, trying to find people in the middle of a crowd of several million. That was a bit of a nightmare, but we are lucky in that mobile phone technology allowed us to actually make some connections and find the people we needed to find. It was touch and go, but we did actually manage to do it. And we also managed to get a good number of participants. So we were able to find people in the middle of the Magh Mela and give them another questionnaire. And this asked about the degree to which they felt part of the community. Did they have a sense of connection with those around them? Did they not? And we also asked them, how were they treated by those around them? Were they offered support? Could they rely on those other people to look after them and help them if they needed it? So this is our research design. It's a questionnaire, so it's a different methodology. Again, I've shown you an interview. I've shown you 2 experiments. Here is a longitudinal survey. So a rather different methodology. Each method is suitable for a different sort of question. And first of all, we can look at well-being. Was it improved or not? Did it go up after people had participated in the pilgrimage? And we find some very nice evidence. Yes. So if you look there, you can see the Kalpvasi, these are the pilgrims, these are the people who went on the pilgrimage. And here we find that there is an increase. The red bar is higher than the blue bar. There's a significant difference there. There is an increase in well-being amongst the pilgrims. If we look at the controls, these are the people who did not go to the festival, did not go on the pilgrimage. They come from the same villages as the Kalpvasi, but they didn't attend. We find no change whatsoever in their well-being. So this tells us that participating in this event had consequences for well-being, first of all. Secondly, we want to find out, well, what are the psychological processes involved in this? Is it anything to do with a sense of an inclusive identity? Is it anything to do with how they felt they were treated by other people there? So we investigated this using the data we gathered during the festival itself. So what we were able to do here is we were able to look at their sense of inclusive identity, their sense of their positive treatment. We find variation between people. Some people in the event wouldn't have a sense of connection with others. They wouldn't have a sense of being part of a community, of being regarded as a valued community member by other people. They didn't have a sense that they were looked after, that they could rely upon other people. But we found other people with a stronger sense of an inclusive identity and a stronger sense that they could rely upon other people and that those other people were there to look out for them. So we were able to, with some fancy statistical modeling, we use statistics quite a lot, we were able to explore the relationship between these variables. And essentially, we were able to show that amongst the Kaltvasi, the pilgrims at the event, the greater they had a sense of an inclusive identity, the greater they felt they belonged to a community, the more they felt that they were treated better by other people, that they could rely upon other people. And that in turn explained the pre to post increase in well-being. That, in other words, helped explain the longitudinal rise in well-being that we'd noticed before. So a very different sort of design, a longitudinal survey design. So hopefully I've given you a bit of a sense of some of the issues that interest me. I'm interested in this inclusive sense of community. What does it give us? It gives you the chance to have a voice, to be critical and to be heard rather than ignored. It means that you will, as like as not, get better treatment. Somebody would stop and pick things up if you drop them. We showed that in the experiment. And in terms of well-being, if you're part of a community, you feel valued, you feel other people will support you, then likely that will contribute to a sense of positive well-being. So as a community psychologist, a social psychologist, there are important issues here. And there are also important issues if you're a business person, if you're in the corporate sector. You need to think about these things because this will impact upon the mood, the feelings of attachment, the commitment people have to an organization. So crucially important things for all sorts of reasons. I've said a little bit about the methods we've used, interviews, experiments, and surveys. The practical implications, I think, are many for any group you can think of. As I've said, if you're a business person, if you're organizing a profession, if you're organizing a university, if you're organizing any group whatsoever, these are things that are relevant to how people feel and experience being in a group, and whether that is positive or negative. And in all sorts of ways, it's absolutely crucial now for us as we face this global pandemic. If you're going to ask people to stay at home, if you're going to ask people to wear masks, if you're going to ask people to do X, Y, and Z, they need to have a sense that they are part of that community. You'd be much more likely to get compliance if people have a sense that they are valued, that they are involved, that they are engaged, and that they really are recognized as part of that community. If you don't have that sense, well, people are going to be much more likely to feel alienated, much less likely to engage on the terms that you wish them to engage and actually undertake all of those social distancing practices. I want to close just by saying a little bit about psychology at Dundee. This is the building that we are based in. It's a wonderful, enormous red sandstone building. We share it with the law department and we share it with politics, but we have a large number of offices there and a great number of research laboratories. I'll say a little bit about that in a minute. Here's a picture of some of my colleagues. It's a youthful, vibrant department, lots of energy. And this was a photograph taken at one of our graduation parties. We do undergraduate programs. We also do master's programs. And there are two in particular that I think are important. We do a continuation degree. So this is a degree for somebody who's already studied psychology. And the one we are offering in the forthcoming academic year is developmental psychology. How does a child develop? What are the stages they go through? What are the skills that they develop? What are the processes that underlie those skills? What are the consequences of failing to develop some of those skills? Then we also offer a master's course in psychology that is a conversion course. And the conversion course is designed for people who do not have a psychology background. This allows you to have a background in whatever, business, engineering, economics, you name it, doesn't really matter. You then have a one-year intensive program that is recognized by the British Psychological Society. And this gives you both breadth and depth. You do the core curriculum that is required by the British Psychological Society for your degree to be recognized as a psychology degree. And that is really important to have an accredited psychology degree. That then opens the door to subsequent training and other opportunities. So it gives you the breadth, but it also gives you the depth because you do a substantial piece of research. a little bit what I've been describing up till now. You do a substantial piece of research, a dissertation. It's worth 60 credits. The whole course is worth 180 credits. So 1/3 of the course is essentially based upon your own independent research. And you do this with the support of somebody else. So essentially with a member of staff, you would discuss an issue that you're both interested in. You try to identify a research question. You have to narrow it down. People are very often very ambitious. You have to be quite realistic. What can you do within a short period of time? Who can you gather data from? How can you gather the data? What question will you be able to ask? Is it an interesting question or a boring question? These are the sorts of things you need to discuss with a supervisor, and then you undertake that piece of research. And it may be that you do it in the field. It may be that you do it in one of our laboratories, because we have excellent facilities. We have facilities that allow you to do research with children. We have laboratories where parents can bring in their children. We can observe the children through one-way mirrors. We can film them. We can look at where the children are looking. So we have all of those facilities. We have research laboratories for looking at how people can read and process visual information. We have laboratories for looking at memory. We have laboratories where they look at decision making. We have laboratories where they're able to record brain activity. So we have a full range of laboratories. And then, of course, if you were to work with me, you're likely to be doing your research out in the field in some setting. So this is a conversion MSc, and it really is a gateway to professional training. It offers the skills in terms of reviewing evidence, being able to draw conclusions, manage data, draw inferences, write up reports. These are fantastic skills. As I said before, psychology is an empirical discipline. You need to be able to read research critically, think about how it was done, what are the problems with that, how better to teach research skills than get people involved in doing research themselves. And you also learn how to write up report. These are transferable skills. Virtually any career that you go into as a graduate will need those abilities to be able to make recommendations, to be able to look at a pattern of data, draw conclusions, make inferences, make recommendations. So these are great skills to have, but the psychology MSc conversion course is key for further training. In the course, you do all of the subjects I've mentioned before, from social right the way through to psychology of language. You taught research skills, you do your dissertation, and then you're free to go on to your career as you wish. Some go into educational psychology, advising students in school on their issues with learning, supporting them through that process. Some go into working as a forensic psychologist, perhaps working with the police, interested in issues around crime and deviance. Some would go into areas concerning health. If you want to stop people smoking, if you want to encourage a healthier diet, if you want to get people to walk more, how can you use psychological theory to motivate people? These are key questions. We also have people who go to work as occupational psychologists, giving advice about what occupations would be suitable for particular people. We also have people who go to work in organizational psychology, sports and exercise psychology. That is quite a new development in the last 10 years or so. And a lot of people are now interested in working with elite athletes, looking at how can you use psychology to improve performance in various ways. And of course, the classic area that many people think of are is the area concerning mental health. That may be clinical psychology or it may be counselling. To get into those courses, typically you need to have a British Psychological Society recognised degree in the UK. So this conversion course opens the door to those sorts of careers. But as I mentioned, all of the skills you learn as part of a psychology course are directly transferable to pretty well any single career you can possibly think about. We're a friendly place, and this is the feedback from one of our MSc students. My teachers were passionate, dedicated, all round exceptional, beyond my expectations of a professor. They made impacts on my education and my life. I'll never be able to thank them enough for the magnificent experience and knowledge they've given me. So we get very positive reports from our students. We value them, we enjoy working with them. We're a small department, so we can afford to spend time with people, and we don't have large numbers of students. So it is a friendly, almost family environment. and the university as a whole is very well ranked. Perhaps the two important things to note here is that we were awarded University of the Year for student experience in the Times and Sunday Times Guide. That is a pretty high accolade. And we also have the TEF Gold. TEF refers to the Teaching Excellence Framework, which is an evaluation of our teaching. And I think it really is true that in Dundee, we try to combine excellent research and excellent teaching. And indeed, the research feeds directly into that teaching. So I've spoken for probably a little bit too long, so I apologize for that. I'll stop now. I believe that there'll be some opportunity to ask questions later on, but that there is some more information that can be shared now about how you could go about thinking about your futures. So thanks very much for the opportunity to talk now. Thanks for your